Hey, whoa, Cabinet of Shame. What's wrong, man?
You just keep stuffing more and more new unbuilt miniatures into me and never take any out to paint. I'm feeling a little bloated.
You know what, man? You're right. I'm sorry. Anyway, did you see what came in the mail today?
No.
My friends over at Kingdom Death Monster wanted to team up yet again, this time challenging me to come up with a dream team of survivors, a foursome capable of taking on any deadly monster in the world of KDM. I've certainly collected my share of Kingdom Death models over the years, and I think if I scour through all of them, I can come up with a perfectly balanced party. But to be honest, the real challenge here is how do I paint up these four survivors as quickly as possible so I can get to the gaming and test them out while still making them look as good as possible in about an hour per model. So I guess it's finally time to break out my secret weapon, something that I've evolved and tweaked over many iterations. That's right, I'm going to share with you my favorite way to speed paint models that don't end up looking speed painted. Now, this speed painting process only encompasses 3 steps, and the first one is the one that I've been experimenting on the most. This step is where I can try to squeeze every little ounce of juice out of the mini painting process as quickly as possible. One of the most impactful and eye-catching things we can do to make our models look good is to integrate depth of color. But this is often a very time-intensive thing, layering up purples and blues into shadows, yellows and reds in the highlights to simulate ambient color. It's pretty complex stuff, which is why we don't often see it in speed painting, but I'm starting by building depth of color from the very get-go with this process. I use a rich blue on the bottom facing surfaces of the model, then a warm sepia from above. This gives us something more interesting than just a black primer to build off of. From there, I do a standard white zenithal from above, making the head and shoulder regions the brightest. The closer we get to the feet and the base of the model, the less of this white we should be using. And right here is where I typically ended step 1. But the problem is this model still feels very flat, very stark. Yes, the blacks are gone, but it's still very dark colors there. So we need to take a little bit more time to boost this up, which is why we're going to come back in with an orange yellow mixed with a touch of our sienna to boost that white zenithal with some warmth. We get wonderful fades from color to darkness where the white meets those shadow tones underneath. Now, if you want to spend just a little bit more time, you can increase this color depth a little bit more as long as you do it sparingly. I'm using a crimson ink here, but just like any of the colors I'm using in this entire painting process, it's completely open to whatever you want to experiment with. And our final stage of step 1 here is what really takes this process over the top. Once I started experimenting with this, my final products ended up looking so much better. It's a simple final zenithal of white with just a touch of our orange yellow ink, focusing around the head and chest yet again. Now that you've seen step 1 all the way through, you might have a few reservations. Yes, I'm using an airbrush, and some people will always be mad anytime I ever use an airbrush in any of my videos, but you can certainly use a big regular paintbrush with diluted paint for all of the colors, and then a big dry brush for the white zenithal steps. I find an airbrush is faster and gives us smoother transitions, but both processes work. You also might be saying that this seems like an awful lot of sub-steps to be considered one step, John, and that's a fair assessment. But again, once you get the hang of this, it is extremely time efficient and it creates such a massive impact. In fact, all this starting work we've done in step 1 speeds up the rest of the painting process so fast, so we make up that time easily. Step 2 is easy mode, and this is nothing new. We're just going to use a single coat of contrast paint or speed paint over each individual surface of the model. There's really no magic here other than the fact that all of that undershading we did transforms how this contrast paint looks and the depth it provides across the model. Now, there are 2 very key steps you want to keep in mind for this step, but before we get into those, I want to spend a little time talking to you about my squad of survivors here. The The first character I started out with is the smarty pants of the group. Every party needs someone with a bit of wisdom that keeps them out of trouble. This mage knows her stuff. She's carrying a big old book, and she's got a katana on her hip if things go south. She is a great support character, and you know what they say about support characters. They don't get all the attention, they're not flashy, but they're often the difference between winning and losing. She has the ability to manipulate the monster's action deck so the party knows what attacks are coming and how to keep themselves out of danger. She's not going to kill the boss, but she's going to give the rest of the squad the best chance of coming out of that encounter in one piece. All right, one of those tricks you really want to make sure to be careful of for this step is to not have such opaque contrast paint that it covers up all of that wonderful undershading that we did in the first step. Some of these paints are extremely potent, so you really have to be careful you don't just undo all the work you did. And of course, there's exceptions to using really dark or saturated contrast paints, and I'll get to those examples in a little bit. But I like to use a little bit of pure water or Lamian medium mixed with most contrast paints to thin them just enough that they still show their color while allowing you to see that warm color depth underneath. The second character I chose for the Fearsome Foursome is a Ranger. Now, I might be a little bit biased here because Rangers are my favorite class to play in just about any game. She's all about consistency. She can pepper the boss with damage each and every round without having to be 6 inches away from his 12-inch fangs. And bosses in this game aren't just going to stand still and let you beat on them. They're going to move around a lot. They've got some crazy reactions and actions. They have counters. They have traps they can pull off on you on your own character's turns. So it's so difficult to keep the damage going unless you've got someone that can shoot halfway across the board at any given moment. Now, this archer has some leaves and feathers on her, and I'm not going to shy away from adding a bit more vibrancy to those details. Now, I'm not going to paint the entire model with that much punch of color, but it's important to accentuate the details on any given model that really make them unique and stand out. I said I had 2 important tips to share for this step, and here's the second one. We want to still integrate in some darker, heavier coloring paints in this step. We just have to do it sparingly, and we want to put them next to places that are quite bright to create a lot of contrast and definition across each model. And just like that, we are on to our third and final step in this process, where everything really comes together to showcase these models as quickly as possible. And don't worry, we're going to get to the final 2 members of our party, but first let's finish up these first 2. And you know what? Many people think that just the contrast step is sufficient enough, and that's fine. But to me, without a nice punch of highlight, we aren't really going to define the crisp edges and shapes to make the model stand out. And honestly, there's no fancy tricks here, other than we want to be using nice, bright colors, brighter than you probably think you need. Now, this goes so fast because we are not painting very much of each surface at all, which is why using a bright color like these is so very important, and why this step does not take very much time.
Today's video was brought to us by Into the AM, my preferred creator of coverings for the mortal vessel. Clothes. They make clothes. And since we only have a limited time on this realm before our flesh husks begin to wither and decay, why not spend that time looking snazzy and feeling comfortable? I choose Into the AM for this purpose, as do many other enlightened beings. You may now rejoice with the knowledge that many of Into the AM's most beloved products are back in stock. You may now proceed to checkout with your electronic shopping cart with these best-selling graphic tees, vintage tees, in something called a relaxed button-up. Henceforth, you and I will be able to meld our consciousness via the connection of our similarly clothed appearance. Do not delay, and do not forget to use code NINJON at checkout or the discount link below to enjoy 10% off your entire order. The time is nigh for Into the AM.
But there is one small detail here that after experimentation really proved to be all the difference in the final outcome of these paint jobs. And that is simple. All we're doing is taking every single highlight color we use, no matter what it is, no matter what surface it is, and we are mixing in just a little bit of that yellow-orange ink or an equivalent standard miniature paint into each of those highlight colors. This will bring back that warmth. This will tie in that warmth from that very first step, and our models will look so unified. And again, this is about moving as fast as possible while maximizing building depth of color. We're just building off of that warmth we've been establishing over the previous 2 steps. It builds that warmth into every surface of the model to make it feel unified and look as if we completed way more steps than we actually did to achieve this final look. Played any sort of RPG in your life, you realize that this party is missing something very, very important, and that would be the tank. The person in big, heavy armor set up to take the hits from the monster so all your squishy friends don't. I'm choosing a tank that's wielding a sweet spear, which also gives him some flexibility to attack at a bit of a distance, which is valuable in this game when I'm trying to cripple a monster's weak points. One thing you may notice throughout the painting of all of these figures is that I'm using a wide variety of colors for the contrast step. Because we have those warm tones from our undershading to help unify everything, I can paint with whatever unique color I think looks cool, and sometimes even transform the contrast paints that we use by placing them on top. I do try to keep the amount of really bright saturated colors to a minimum, just like the leaves and feathers for our archer. I'm just using the one vibrant color on this guy, which is the red. The main reason why this is my favorite way to speed paint models is not only is it really fast, but it's also a lot of fun. It's so satisfying to see the big impacts we make as we start doing that highlighting step. Prior to that step, it's kind of hard for your eye to differentiate all the interesting details around the model. I just try to go over each surface with one pass of highlights, which is typically plenty, and it just transforms it. Now, we can very easily paint metals with the speed painting process. In fact, it's a great way to learn if you've never done NMM before. I do 2 highlights for every section of metal instead of 1, and I'm going to add a bit of pure white along with our yellow-orange to the base color, which is kind of a faded blue-gray. And with that second highlight, we're really adding more of that white to really boost it up, bounce it up from a really dark area to a really bright one really quickly. Don't worry, we'll break down the metals a second time so you can see it done again on our 4th and final figure, which is this weird looking dude wearing a hoodie, earphones, a respirator, and are those testicles on his kneecaps? I don't know if that was style choice or it was a combat advantage to knee balls. Whatever he is, this guy is a brand new model from the Frog Dog expansion, and he is actually a modular figure. You see, as you go on hunts and kill very vicious monsters in this game, you collect a bunch of resources from them. And you use those resources to craft weapons, armor, and upgrade your settlement. And the game gives you all of those gear options for you to build and paint your own models based on the gear you've compiled in your campaign. I'm not gonna lie, this is the main reason that I jumped into this game years ago. It's because I always wanted a miniatures game to act like the video games that I enjoyed so much. I wanted my character with all the awesome gear that I farmed, all the specific things I've crafted, to actually be a physical model that looks exactly like the character sheet. So that's where this character comes in. Our group is still missing a pure melee DPS class. So I built this sneaky looking bloke with 2 vicious looking daggers. He's got high mobility. He can deliver a bunch of extra damage as long as the tank is doing his job and keeping the monster facing the other direction. All right, let's get back to talking about his knee testes. I don't know exactly what they are, but I do know one thing about Kingdom Death, and that is there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of really weird, interesting mechanics and items. I'm guessing these are actual items in the game, and because this is a brand new expansion and I haven't played it yet, I don't want to do any spoilers for myself or for you, but we got to figure out how to paint these things. I got to say, we might as well make them one of the focal points of the paint job, so let's make them look as sickly and nasty as possible. The great thing about this painting system is that you can typically paint any surface, any color you want. It's going to end up looking great. But there are a few exceptions, and one of those are dealing with the hoodie of this character. As I looked at him, that hoodie is actually connected to his sleeveless tunic, which then connects to his whole skirty bits that are flaring around his waist, meaning that's all one piece of fabric. I originally wanted to paint that a nice dark blue, maybe even black color, but what that would do is make the model look so dark, since so much of it is this one material, and if I painted it that dark, I'd be covering up all of those awesome undertones we built up in step one. So I decided to go with a sickly yellowish green. In hindsight, this color was a bit too close to his skin color for my liking, especially on his shoulders. They kind of just meld in with the tunic. If I were to do it over again, I'd actually just paint his skin color a little bit darker, so that way we'd see that differentiation. All right, let's finish up this guy by breaking down how to paint his daggers to look like metal. Now, these blades already have a bunch of interesting colors and tones on them. Let's not cover that. Instead, let's make one main scratchy highlight on each face of the blade. And if we want, we can even add a second smaller reflection a little bit further down the blade. For this, I'm using the same French blue, which is a desaturated gray blue, some of our orange yellow, and then white as we did on the fighter. But the important thing is that we come back in with that second vibrant highlight and we really boost it up while still showing a bit of that first highlight on the edges. I really believe that speed painting to learn non-metallic metal is a great thing because we're just focusing on doing these two steps, creating our initial really vibrant highlight and then boosting it even further on those edges and in a smaller space, and bam, it looks like real metal. Now for the bases of these models, I want them done fast, and they already have interesting tones from the overspray of the airbrush. So I'm just going to use Cassandora Yellow Shade Paint and then Berserker Blood Shade, both by Citadel. The yellow goes on the brighter parts of the base, wherever those happen to be, and the red goes on the darker areas. And then I just slop the two colors together wherever they meet. You know, in hindsight, I could have gone in with a really quick dry brush to highlight the interesting details on each of these bases before this shade step, and they'd probably look even better, but I think they already look fine the way they are. And just like that, we have our MVP Survivor Party ready to go. And this was less than an hour a model. Now, it may take you longer the first couple of times that you try this system, but as you get accustomed, especially for that first step, to being efficient with creating those undershades, everything else moves super quickly. But just like anything, with practice, you'll get quicker and you'll get better. Once you get the hang of that undershading, and if you use a brush and dry brush combo instead of your airbrush, just be patient with yourself as you get the hang of it. But once you do, you'll be flying through your backlog of models in no time. And again, my favorite part is that I don't think these things look like they were speed painted. But they are speed painted, which is good because I'll be less frustrated when one of them undoubtedly gets their head lopped off by the Nightmare Butcher in my next campaign. But that's just it. The intensity, the strategy, the wild events that take place in the game that you and your friends will be talking about for years to come is why I'm such a fan of Kingdom Death Monster. A massive thank you to Adam Poots and the entire KDM team for teaming up with me to create this video. Honestly, there's not very much that makes me happier as a mini painting YouTuber than working hand in hand with a company whose models I just love and whose game I genuinely love playing in my free time. If you haven't checked out Kingdom Death Monster before, I'll put a link down in the description so you can show them some love. The game has so much replayability, no two campaigns are even close to the same, and you can swap out whichever awesome monsters you want to hunt in each new campaign. And like I said, the plastic models are as good as any on the market. So while the game certainly isn't a cheap one, you're going to get your money's worth. If you enjoyed today's video, could you do me a solid and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, please. A massive thank you for your support there, and an even bigger thank you for those of you that are patrons over on the Ninja Patreon. I've got a link down below if you want to check it out and see the fun rewards you get for joining me over there, like access to my Discord server and my weekly Wednesday vlog videos. Now, if you excuse me, I've got some monsters to attempt to slay, but don't worry, I'll be back next week with another new video. And sometime between now and then, make sure you find time in your day to slay the gray.